Uncle Sam screwed up. In a recent report, the feds attempted to demonize 2 strategies for creating multi-million-dollar profits in your retirement account. And in the process, they showed us just how to do it. I'm Bryan Ellis. I'll tell you all about those strategies right now in episode number 107.
You're listening to Self-Directed Investor Radio, America's only podcast exclusively for affluent, self-directed investors, where each day of the week you receive innovative investment strategy and deadly accurate market analysis that's untainted by Wall Street and unblemished by government propaganda, all in 7 minutes or less. Coming to you now from iTunes, Stitcher, and SDIRadio.com, here's your host, Bryan Ellis.
Hello, SDI Nation. So great to be with you again. I've got so much to share with you. After today's show, you'll feel like you've been drinking from a fire hose. First, there are 2 extraordinary resources I'd like to share with you through the 5-star listener group. Resource number 1 is a fascinating interview with a little-known but incredibly insightful financial analyst. I was blown away. There's a connection between the price of gold and the price of housing, and it's been incredibly predictive in the past. I never would have guessed this correlation, but it's true. And in this special interview, you'll see exactly what it's predicting for housing in the immediate future. You've got to hear it. Resource number 2 is a training video called The Profit Partition Partnership, Uncle Sam's Way to Millions. And it's an astounding strategy that I'll bet big time you've never heard of. You'll get a bit of an introduction to it in today's show, but I'll tell you, this one has so many different wildly powerful applications specifically for retirement account investing that it's impossible to overstate the importance of this info. You've got to see it. Both of these trainings, the Gold Housing Ratio Interview and the Profit Partition Partnership Training, are totally free to members of the Self-Directed Investor Radio 5-star listener group. And it's free to be a member of that group. All you need to do is text the word SDI Group to 33444 and you're in. Again, that's SDI Group with no spaces or periods, spelled SDIGROUP. Just text SDI Group to 33444 for free access to the SDI 5-star listener group. My friends, a fascinating report from the federal government's General Accountability Office was released in October 2014. No, the writing wasn't riveting, and this one won't make any best-of literary lists, but for anyone smart enough to read between the lines, that report was packed tight with content that's actually really helpful. Not all of the news is good in that report. I told you about some of it in a previous episode of SDI Radio. The entire report is a reaction to the fact that there's a very small group of Americans who have grown their IRAs to a very large size, $25 million or more. That's the type of result many of us dream of, isn't it? Yet, that's the type of success that gets negative attention from the government. Oh, and by the way, there are only 314 IRAs in the entire country as of the date of that publication that had $25 million or more. Yep, that's right. This 93-page report, which doubtlessly cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for the government to produce, is aimed at 314 people. Actually, it's less than that because, as you see by reading the report, the feds are really only concerned with people who have large Roth IRAs because they know ultimately they'll get their piece of all those traditional accounts. But the Roths, well, any Roth account is entirely opposed to the purpose of the government, which is to grow the size and power of government, since the profit in those Roth accounts will never be subject to taxation. So it's a clear double standard, but that's what we expect from Uncle Sam, isn't it? So the real gold that appears in this report comes in Appendix 4, aptly titled Examples of Strategies to Accumulate Large Individual Retirement Accounts. I'll preface this by saying that both of these strategies are really interesting intellectually, but as I explain them to you, there's a crazy high probability you're going to think something like, sounds interesting, but I'm not going to take a company public, or maybe sounds interesting, but I'm not a partner in a billion-dollar hedge fund. Fair enough. Just listen to the strategies, and then I promise I'll help you to understand how they connect to you. Actually, I think only one of them is relevant for you, but it could be relevant for a whole lot of you. So strategy number 1 works like this. A group of people form a new business and structure it as a privately held corporation. The founders decide that the companies should issue 100 million shares of stock at an incredibly small price per share, something like an eighth of a penny per share. And one of those founders, we'll call him Brilliant Bob, well, he very wisely contributes $5,000 to a Roth IRA and spends all of that money on buying into shares of this new company. Well, at such a tiny per share price, $5,000 actually buys Brilliant Bob 4 million shares. So a few years later, this company's doing well. They raise capital by selling some shares to a venture capital firm at $10 apiece. And Brilliant Bob gets to participate in that by selling 1 million of his shares. Well, right there, Bob makes a windfall of $10 million. He really is brilliant. But it gets better a few years later when the company goes public at $25 a share, and those other 3 million shares that Bob owns, well, they're now worth $75 million. So Brilliant Bob now has an $85 million Roth IRA, and he'll never pay a dime of taxes on that money. Okay, so here's the thing about that strategy. It's just not practical for most people. Unless you're involved at the very front end on a company that ultimately proves very successful in the public market, you're not likely to be able to replicate this particular type of result. But my friends, I think this example, while far less applicable to me and you than the second example you're about to hear, is nevertheless fascinating. That is a way that makes sense to me to play the stock market as a founder of the companies that go public and not as an investor in publicly traded shares. But what about the other strategy in the IRS report? You're likely to feel that this example is just as unapproachable as the first, but my friends, there's huge, massive potential in this one for me and for you. So this example involves the creation of an investment fund. I'll spare you some of the less interesting details, but the way it works is this. A group of 10 successful investors, including our hero for this story, Genius Jane, they partner together to form an investment company where they invest money on behalf of third parties. They manage to raise $1 billion from their clients, and the way they're compensated is that they get to keep 20% of the profits they generate. This is called a profits interest, and it's a fairly common and pretty fair way for investment managers to be compensated. So Genius Jane played the whole situation very smartly. Like all 10 of the partners in the investment fund, Genius Jane had to invest some capital herself at the start, but her investment came straight from her Roth IRA. Why does that matter? Because the fund proves to be very successful, and over the next 10 years it generates $1 billion in profits. The investment fund is compensated for that by getting 20% of those profits, or $200 million. And Genius Jane gets 10% of that, $20 million. Totally tax-free, forever. Well, my friends, I've got some news for you. This strategy, the profits interest concept, is something that's really powerful and wildly powerful for you and me, even though we may not be forming a $1 billion private equity fund anytime soon. How? I'll give you more about this tomorrow, but I sincerely and strongly recommend that you join the Self-Directed Investor Radio 5-star listeners group right now so you can see the full training I'm doing on this concept. It will be detailed, powerful, and incredibly revealing to you. I'm confident it'll blow your mind. It's free to join that group. Just text the word SDI group with no spaces or periods to 33444 right now. Again, text the word SDI group to 33444 right now. My friends, invest wisely today and live well forever.
Thank you for listening to Self-Directed Investor Radio with Bryan Ellis. Don't miss a single episode. Be sure to subscribe to Self-Directed Investor Radio right now on iTunes, on Stitcher, and at SDIRadio.com. Your feedback is always welcomed via email at feedback@SDIRadio.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only and is not intended as legal or professional advice for your situation. Content is the property of the Self-Directed Investor Society.